The universe ended in a scream of tortured metal. Alex gripped the arms of his crash couch, knuckles white, as the transport ship, the Stellar Pilgrim, tore itself apart around him. Alarms blared in a dozen alien languages, a discordant symphony of panic. Through the viewport, the planet Xylos wasn't just approaching. It was clawing at them, a vortex of ochre clouds and jagged, lightning-scarred mountains. He was a xenobotanist's assistant, a glorified bag carrier who cataloged spores. He was not meant to die like this. The final impact was less a crash and more a geological event. It threw him against his restraints with bone-jarring force, and the world dissolved into a concussive roar and then silence. A profound, ringing silence broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the frantic, terrified thumping of his own heart. He hung upside down for a long moment, the taste of blood and ozone in his mouth. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the buckled deck. The ship was a tomb, canted at a sickening angle, a spear of black rock punching through its belly. Survival protocols, drilled into him during a mind-numbingly dull orientation, surfaced through the fog of shock. 1. Check your suit's integrity. His standard-issue jumpsuit was torn, but the rebreather mask he'd managed to slap on was sealed, its small indicator light a reassuring green. The air outside was unbreathable. He already knew that from the pre-landing briefs. Xylos was classified as a death world not for dramatic effect, but as a simple statement of fact. 2. Assess other survivors. He unbuckled and dropped to what was now the floor, his boots crunching on shattered composite panels. The main passenger compartment was a charnel house. He forced himself to look away to focus on movement. He found 3. The first was a Cathar, a silicon-based life form that resembled a sculpture of obsidian shards. Its name was Kalen. Before the crash, Kalen had been an arbiter, its voice a series of resonant, crystalline chimes that conveyed an unshakable sense of logical superiority. Now it was braced against a bulkhead, several of its smaller facets cracked, leaking a slow, viscous fluid that smelled like hot sand. Its optical sensors, glowing blue slits, tracked Alex with cold, analytical focus. The organic's vital signs are erratic but functional, Kalen chimed, its voice distorted by a slight crackle. Probability of long-term survival, negligible. Glad to see you too, Alex muttered, his own voice hoarse inside his mask. A faint, shimmering light pulsed from a ruptured containment pod nearby. Inside, a being of pure energy, a lumina named Alara, flickered like a dying candle. Her species communicated through modulated light and empathic projection, and what Alex felt from her now was a tidal wave of terror so potent it made his teeth ache. Her containment suit was breached, and she was losing cohesion, her form wavering as she bled energy into the hostile atmosphere. The third survivor was a grok. Boar, a hulking, four-armed biped covered in thick, mossy fur, was groaning, pinned beneath a heavy support beam. One of his lower arms was bent at an impossible angle. The grok were gentle herbivores, galactic trade haulers known for their immense strength and placid nature. Boar's wide, dark eyes, usually calm and thoughtful, were wide with pain and fear. Alex's mind, which hours ago had been occupied with the classification of fungal blooms, was now a frantic checklist of immediate threats. The ship's hull was groaning, threatening to collapse further. The outside air was a corrosive soup of chlorine and argon, and according to the briefs, the native life was uniformly hostile. "We have to get out," Alex said, the words feeling alien and inadequate. "The logical course of action is to stay with the wreckage," Kalen stated. "It offers the most substantial shelter. The distress beacon, when it activates, will lead rescuers here." Alex pointed a shaking finger at the console above them, where the beacon's status light was dark and the panel around it melted slag. "The beacon's fried. No one is coming, not for a long, long time." The blue slits of Kalen's eyes dimmed slightly, the closest the creature could come to a frown. The logic was inescapable. Ignoring the Cathar's silent reassessment, Alex moved to the grok. "Boar, can you move?" the large alien moaned, a sound like stones grinding together. "Pinned. The weight is great." Alex looked at the beam. It was massive. He couldn't shift it alone. "Kalen, I need your help. If we can lever this." "My structural integrity is compromised," the Cathar replied, indicating its cracked facets. Applying pressure would be illogical. Frustration, sharp and hot, cut through Alex's fear. He'll die if we leave him here. He looked around, his gaze falling on a long, bent piece of bulkhead plating. A lever, basic physics. He'd read about it in books, seen it in old movies. He wedged one end under the massive beam, piling smaller chunks of wreckage beneath it to create a fulcrum. This is a futile gesture, Kalen observed. Your musculature is insufficient. Shut up and help me, Alex grunted, putting his whole body weight onto the makeshift lever. The metal groaned but didn't budge. He felt a wave of despair, cold and heavy. He was going to watch this gentle giant die. Then a soft pulse of light touched his mind. Ilara. Her fear was still there, but beneath it was a thread of something else. Together, the fulcrum shifts. He didn't understand, but a new wave of energy seemed to flow through him. He repositioned his fulcrum just a few inches to the left. He tried again. This time the beam lifted, just a fraction, but it was enough. With a monumental groan, Bohr dragged his massive body free, his injured arm held protectively against his chest. The grok slumped against the wall, breathing in ragged, whistling gasps. My thanks, small one. Alex nodded, winded, his muscles screaming. He looked back at Ilara. Her light was fainter now. The breach in her suit was widening. We need to patch that, Alex said, thinking aloud. Seal it somehow. The necessary materials are not present, Kalen stated flatly. Alex ignored it again. He rummaged through a spilled emergency kit, finding a roll of high-tensile sealant tape and a tube of epoxy. It was designed for patching suits, but not for containing a being of coherent energy. Still, it was better than nothing. As he carefully applied the patch, he could feel Ilara's presence in his mind, a soft warmth of gratitude that was a stark contrast to the cold dread that filled the ruined ship. With Bohr freed and Ilara's suit temporarily sealed, the immediate crisis was over. But as Alex looked through a crack in the hull at the alien landscape, the true scale of their problem began to sink in. A sickly yellow sky stretched over a landscape of rust-colored rock and razor-sharp flora. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound that promised violence. This world was a predator, and they were the soft, helpless prey caught in its jaws. We need shelter, water, and food, Alex said, the words feeling heavy, authoritative. He didn't know where the authority was coming from. It was just a hollow space inside him being filled by necessity. And we need it now. Kalen tilted its crystalline head. You are a botanist's assistant. Your designated function does not include survival command. My designated function was on a ship that doesn't exist anymore, Alex shot back, surprised by the hardness in his own voice. Out here, my function is whatever keeps us alive. Right now, that means getting us out of this collapsing death trap before that sky opens up. He pointed at the ochre clouds, which were beginning to swirl in a sickly, greenish pattern. He had no idea what that meant, but his gut, an irrational human organ Kalen would surely dismiss, was screaming that it was bad. He had to trust it. It was all he had. The first shelter was a shallow cave Alex found 100 meters from the crash site. It was little more than an overhang in the rust-colored rock, but it was protection. Getting everyone there was an ordeal. Bohr, despite his size, limped heavily, leaning on Alex for support. Kalen moved with a stiff, grinding gait, its shattered facets scraping against the ground. Ilara's pod had to be carried, and it felt unnervingly light in Alex's arms. They made it inside just as the sky fulfilled its promise. The rain didn't fall. It descended in thick, viscous sheets that hissed as they struck the rock. A drop landed on a metal fragment of the Pilgrim's hull near the cave mouth, and the metal smoked, dissolving into a pockmarked ruin. Acid, your irrational impulse has proven advantageous, Kalen conceded, its chimes lacking their usual confident ring. Alex just nodded, his gaze fixed on the horrifying downpour. He felt a sliver of pride quickly swallowed by a fresh wave of fear. He had gotten them out of the ship. He had found them shelter from the acid rain. He had passed the first test. But Xylos was just getting started. As the freezing night began to fall, the temperature plummeting with alarming speed, and the howling of unseen things echoed from the canyons, Alex knew this was just the beginning of their education in what it meant to be truly, hopelessly lost. The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine of misery and small, desperate victories. Water was the first hurdle. The ship's emergency rations included water purification tablets, but their supply was pitifully finite. Alex spent a full cycle, Xylos' 30-hour day, observing. He watched how the morning mist, thick and cloying, condensed on the underside of broad, waxy leaves of a native plant. The plant itself was toxic, its spines weeping a paralytic neurotoxin, but the water that dripped from its leaves was pure. Rigging a collection system was a challenge in ingenuity. He used sections of salvaged conduit from the ship and a flexible nutrient pouch from the medkit. Kalen watched the entire process with silent skepticism. "The probability of contamination is significant," the Cathar chimed as Alex took the first, tentative sip from the pouch. The water was clean, tasting faintly of minerals. Alex offered the pouch to Boar. The large grok drank deeply, his rumbling sigh one of pure relief. Alex then poured a small amount into a tray for Kalen. The Cathar required water to facilitate its internal chemical reactions, just like any other lifeform, a fact it seemed to resent. It absorbed the liquid slowly through porous nodes on its lower body. The victory was small, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was a problem he had identified, analyzed, and solved. For the first time since the crash, Alex felt a flicker not of hope, but of agency. He wasn't just a victim of this world, he was a participant. Food was a far more complex problem. The emergency nutrient bars would last a week, maybe two if they were severely rationed. Boar was in the worst shape. His biology required massive amounts of fibrous vegetation, and the rust-colored landscape seemed to offer nothing but razor-edged rocks and poisonous plants. The grok was growing weaker, his mossy fur losing its luster. Alara had no need for physical sustenance, but her energy levels were critically low. The patch on her suit was a temporary fix, and she was still leaking, a slow, steady drain of her very essence. She spent most of her time in a low-power state, her light a barely perceptible throb. Kalen, being silicon-based, could theoretically sustain itself on certain types of rock, but it needed specific trace minerals to repair its crystalline structure. The geology of this region is primarily iron oxide composites, it reported after one of its slow, analytical surveys of their surroundings. Insufficient for cellular reconstruction. Their group was a collection of specialized needs, a fragile ecosystem on the verge of collapse. And Alex, the generalist, the adaptable ape descendant, was the only one capable of holding it all together. He began to explore further from the cave, always within sight of the landmark of the crashed ship, his salvaged multi-tool clutched in his hand. He became a student of Xylos. He learned which small, six-legged creatures were edible when cooked, they tasted like burnt wiring, and which ones would kill you. He learned that the razor grass that covered the plains could be woven into surprisingly strong cordage. He learned to read the sky, to tell the difference between the green tinge that heralded acid rain and the deep violet that preceded the bone-chilling flash freezes of the night. Their first encounter with a major predator came without warning. Alex was attempting to pry edible grubs from a petrified tree stump when he heard a low chittering sound. He looked up to see a pack of creatures loping towards them. They were called stalkers in the ship's database, a name that was horribly apt. They moved low to the ground, their mottled hides a perfect camouflage against the rocks. 6 of them, lean and vulpine, with jaws that unhinged to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Panic seized him. His first instinct was to run, but Boar was too slow, Kalen too stiff. He stood his ground, brandishing a sharpened piece of wreckage like a spear. It felt laughably inadequate. The stalkers fanned out, circling their small, pathetic group. Kalen assumed a defensive posture, its undamaged facets glinting. Threat analysis. We are outmaneuvered and physically inferior. Combat is illogical. No kidding, Alex breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Boar let out a low growl, placing his huge body in front of Alara's container. He was weak, but he was still formidable. The stalkers hesitated, their yellow eyes fixed on the grok. The lead creature feinted, darting in and then back out, testing their defenses. Alex's mind raced. He remembered a detail from the zoological report on Xylos. Most of the planet's fauna had evolved in the dim light beneath the thick, perpetual cloud cover. Their eyes were extremely sensitive. In his pocket, he had a salvaged emergency flare. His hands shook as he fumbled with the cap. He had one shot. The lead stalker gathered its powerful hind legs, preparing to leap. Alex twisted the flare's base. It erupted with a blinding magnesium-white glare and a deafening hiss. The effect was instantaneous. The stalkers reeled back, screeching in agony, clawing at their eyes. The sudden, overwhelming sensory input was more than their primitive nervous systems could handle. They broke and fled, disappearing back into the rocks as quickly as they had appeared. Silence descended, broken only by their own ragged breathing. Alex's legs gave out, and he sat down hard on the ground, the hot flare casing still clutched in his hand. He felt Alara's presence in his mind, not a thought but a pure, undiluted feeling of awe and relief. Boar rumbled his thanks. Even Kalen seemed to reconsider him. "Your solution was unconventional," the Cathar chimed, "but effective. The data on photosensitive neural overload will be added to my threat assessment matrix." That night, huddled in the relative warmth of the cave, a new dynamic began to form. They weren't just a human, a Cathar, a Lumina, and a Grok anymore. They were a unit, a deeply dysfunctional, utterly desperate unit, but a unit nonetheless. Alara initiated the first real conversation, projecting her thoughts into their minds, a common language of feeling and intent. The small one thinks differently. He sees patterns where we see chaos. "It is not chaos," Kalen corrected, though its tone was less certain than before. "It is a complex system of variables for which we lacked sufficient data. The human is adept at processing incomplete data sets and acting on high-probability assumptions. It is a reckless, yet occasionally successful methodology." "He calls it instinct," Boar rumbled, gently tending to a cut on his leg with a poultice of mashed grubs Alex had shown him. "And ingenuity." Alex, cleaning the grime from his multi-tool, just listened. He explained his background to them, that he wasn't a soldier or a survivalist. He was just a guy from a temperate, comfortable world who had a hobby of reading old Earth books about exploration and naturalism. He'd built campfires in simulations and learned to tie knots from a datapad. It was all theory, a game he played in his spare time. He never imagined it would be the most valuable knowledge he possessed. In turn, he learned from them. Kalen's cold logic, while infuriating at times, was invaluable for planning. The Cathar could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a rock ledge or the optimal trajectory for throwing a sharpened stone with unerring accuracy. Boar, despite his weakness, possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of galactic trade routes and engine mechanics, which proved useful when they began scavenging more complex components from the wreck. And Alara was their heart. Her empathic sense could detect the emotional state of the native creatures, often giving them a few precious seconds of warning before an attack. She bound them together, smoothing the sharp edges of their disparate personalities. Their next great challenge was crossing the open plains. Their current location was picked clean of resources. Alex had spotted a distant line of dark green through his salvaged binoculars, a different biome, a potential source of food for Boar. But between them and it lay a stretch of flat, cracked earth that shimmered under the sickly yellow sun. The ground was dotted with perfectly circular holes, some small, some wide enough to swallow a man. Subterranean predators, Kalen identified, cross-referencing with the ship's database. Burrowers, ambush hunters, they detect prey through seismic vibrations. Walking across the plain was suicide. They debated for an entire cycle. Kalen proposed a complex, multi-day detour through the mountains. Boar was too weak for such a climb. Alex stared out at the plain, watching the small, skittering creatures that managed to survive there. He noticed something. They moved in short, erratic bursts, then froze for long periods. They never moved in a straight, rhythmic line. The idea that came to him was both brilliant and terrifyingly risky. It was born of his memory of old war movies and seismic sensors. They would create a diversion. They spent 2 days preparing. Alex and Boar hauled heavy, flat slabs of wreckage to the edge of a cliff overlooking the plain. Kalen calculated the precise points of impact needed to generate the strongest, most consistent vibrations away from their intended path. They used the woven razorgrass cordage to rig a timed release system. anchored by smaller rocks that could be pushed over at the right moment. The crossing was the most nerve-wracking experience of Alex's life. He took the lead, with Alara's pod strapped to his back. Boar and Kalen followed in his exact footsteps. Every 10 minutes he would signal. High on the cliff, one of the anchors would be released, and a huge slab of metal would crash onto the rocks below, sending a shudder through the ground. Twice, they saw the result. A massive, chittering maw of teeth and chitin erupted from the earth where the slab had landed, snapping at empty air before sinking back beneath the surface. Alex's blood ran cold each time. They were walking through a minefield, guided only by his theory. He focused on his steps, on the rhythm of his breathing, on the soft, reassuring presence of Alara in his mind. He wasn't just scared anymore. Part of him, a part he didn't recognize, was hyper-aware, focused, and intensely alive. He felt the texture of the ground through the soles of his boots, the shift in the wind against his face. He was reading the world, speaking its language of survival. When they finally reached the edge of the dark green foliage, they collapsed in exhaustion and relief. Boar immediately began to chew on the thick, nutrient-rich leaves of a tree, a low hum of pleasure rumbling in his chest. Alex watched him, a feeling of deep satisfaction washing over him. He had seen the problem. He had devised the solution, and it had worked. He looked back across the plain of death they had just crossed. The ochre dust swirled in the wind, a place of certain doom for anyone else. But not for them, not anymore. He looked down at his hands, calloused and dirty, and felt a strange sense of ownership. This place was trying to kill him, and he was learning to kill it back, or at least to outsmart it. And a quiet, unsettling thought rose in his mind. He was starting to enjoy the challenge. The new biome was a revelation. It was a dense, swampy forest of bioluminescent fungi and towering, moss-covered trees. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of decay and alien blossoms. It was teeming with life and with new dangers. Flying predators with leathery wings, which they called glimmerwings, were drawn to Alara's light, forcing them to camouflage her pod with mud and leaves. Carnivorous plants snapped at their heels, and the water in the bogs was acidic enough to eat through their boots if they stood still for too long. But it was also a place of opportunity. Within a single cycle, they found a grove of trees whose bark, when stripped and pounded, provided Boar with the sustenance he needed. His strength began to return, his movements becoming less pained, more purposeful. Not long after, while exploring a network of geothermal caves at the base of a dormant volcano, Kalen made a discovery. The mineral formations, the Cathar chimed, its voice resonating with something approaching excitement. They contain lattices of silicate and germanium. They are compatible. Over the next few weeks, Kalen would spend hours pressed against the warm, glowing veins of crystal, slowly, painstakingly absorbing the minerals. The cracks in its obsidian body began to heal, sealing over with new, glassy growth. Its movements became smoother, its logic even sharper. Alex, meanwhile, found his own breakthrough. He discovered a type of semi-sentient slime mold that reacted to energy fields. When he brought a small sample near Alara's pod, it swarmed towards the breach in her suit, hardening into a flexible, organic seal. The effect was immediate. Alara's light brightened, her form solidifying. "The drain has stopped," she projected, her mental voice filled with a joy so pure it brought tears to Alex's eyes. I can begin to heal." They had found their sanctuary. The geothermal caves provided warmth against the freezing nights. A nearby spring, filtered through volcanic rock, gave them a steady supply of fresh water. The forest provided food for Boar, minerals for Kalen, and a patch for Alara. Alex even found a type of starchy tuber that, when roasted over the steam vents, was surprisingly palatable. For the first time since the crash, they were not just surviving day to day. They were stable. They were building a life. Alex became the master of their small world. He learned to fashion tools from rock and wreckage. He wove baskets from vines to carry food. He created a simple alarm system at the mouth of their cave using tripwires and pieces of scrap metal. He learned the migration patterns of the forest creatures, the life cycle of the fungi, the rhythm of the seasons on this violent, beautiful planet. He felt himself changing. The soft-handed academic was gone, replaced by a harder, leaner man with calloused hands and eyes that were constantly scanning the horizon. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a tool, a whetstone that kept his senses sharp. He had never felt so capable, so purposeful. Back on his civilized homeworld, he had been a tiny cog in a vast, incomprehensible machine. Here on Xylos, his actions had immediate, tangible consequences. His success meant life. His failure meant death. There was a purity to it, a terrifying clarity he had never known. Their conversations around the flickering bioluminescent light of the cave grew deeper. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, forged in crisis. "Your species is a paradox, Alex," Kalen observed one night, its newly repaired facets gleaming. "You are physically fragile, emotionally volatile, and your lifespan is absurdly brief. Yet, you possess a capacity for adaptation that defies logic. You do not merely endure an environment, you reshape it. You repurpose its threats into tools." "We had to," Alex replied, sharpening a wooden spear with a flake of obsidian. "Our home world was like this once. Not as bad, maybe, but we didn't have claws or thick hides or venom. We just had our brains and our hands. We had to learn to make fire because we were cold. We had to make spears because we were hungry. I guess it's still in us somewhere." "You lead," Alara projected softly. "Not with logic like Kalen would, or with strength like Boar. You lead with possibility. You look at a cliff and see a tool. You look at a poison plant and see a source of water. You see what can be, not just what is." Boar nodded his massive head. "You are the keeper of this place. You have learned its secrets and keep us safe from its anger." The name stuck. The Keeper. Alex felt a strange pride in the title. It was a role he had never asked for, but one he had earned. Their idol, however, was not destined to last. Xylos always had another test. Kalen, with its repaired internal sensors, detected it first. Subtle barometric shifts. A change in the planet's magnetic field, a pattern in the atmospheric ionization. "A storm is coming," the Cathar announced, its voice flat, but the announcement landed with the weight of a death sentence. "A hypercyclonic electrical event. According to the ship's meteorological data, such a storm occurs once every 11 local years. It is an extinction-level weather pattern." Alex looked at the sky. The familiar ochre haze was being replaced by a bruised, purple-black canopy that seemed to boil. The air grew heavy, static electricity making the hairs on his arms stand on end. "The cave?" he asked, his voice tight. "Insufficient," Kalen replied. "The electrical discharge will be drawn to the geothermal vents and the mineral deposits. The water within the caves will be flash-boiled. The air will be superheated to the point of incineration. To remain here is to be cooked alive." Fear, cold and familiar, gripped Alex, but this time it was followed by a surge of defiance. This world had tried to crush them, poison them, starve them, and eat them. He had outsmarted it every time. He would not be beaten by a change in the weather. "No," he said, standing up. "We don't run, we don't hide, we fight it." The plan he conceived was audacious, bordering on insane. It was a synthesis of everything he had learned about Xylos, and everything he remembered from his life before. He had seen how lightning on this world was drawn to a certain type of metallic, crystalline rock that jutted from the mountaintops. Natural lightning rods. Their cave system was nestled at the base of the largest of these peaks. "A Faraday cage," Alex explained, scratching a diagram in the dirt with a stick. "We can't stop the energy, but maybe we can redirect it. If we can run a conductive material from the peak, around our cave, and ground it deep in the earth, we can create a path of least resistance for the lightning. It will flow around us, not through us." The amount of conductive material required would be immense, Kalen calculated. "We do not possess the resources." "Yes, we do," Alex said, his eyes glinting. "The Stellar Pilgrim." The journey back to the crash site was a desperate race against the clock. The sky grew darker with every hour, and the wind shrieked like a tortured animal. They worked in a frantic, coordinated frenzy. Boar, with his returned strength, tore massive plates and thick bundles of power cabling from the ruined ship. Kalen directed him, pointing out the most conductive alloys and calculating the lengths they would need. Alex worked alongside them, his smaller frame useful for crawling into tight spaces to detach the stubborn wiring. Alara provided a calming, focusing presence, a silent hub around which their frantic energy revolved, her light a beacon in the growing gloom. They hauled the material back to the mountain, a team of ants moving mountains of their own. The final phase of the plan was the most dangerous. Someone had to climb the treacherous peak to anchor the main cables. There was no discussion. It had to be Alex. He was the lightest, the most agile. The climb was a nightmare. The wind threatened to peel him from the rock face. Static discharges, precursors to the main storm, arced through the air, making his teeth buzz. He hammered pitons made of sharpened wreckage into the rock, hauling the heavy cable up behind him. Below, Bohr acted as his anchor, his huge form a bulwark against the gale. Kalen shouted instructions, calculating angles and tension. He reached the summit just as the first massive bolt of lightning split the heavens, striking a nearby peak with a deafening crack that shook the very bones of the mountain. The air sizzled with ozone. Working with numb fingers, Alex secured the main cable around the metallic spire, then began his perilous descent. They finished laying the last of the grounding wires just as the storm broke in its full fury. They huddled deep inside their cave, watching as the world outside became a hellscape of light and sound. The sky was a continuous, strobing flash of white and violet. Lightning didn't just strike. It crawled across the ground in incandescent rivers. A bolt hit their peak. For a heart-stopping second, the entire mountain glowed. The cable, now white-hot, hummed with unimaginable power. The ground trembled. The air in the cave became stiflingly hot. Alex could feel the raw energy just meters away, a caged god of destruction. He saw the energy flow down the cable, following the path they had laid, arcing over the mouth of their cave and plunging into the deep chasm they had chosen as a ground. It was working. Their insane, impossible plan was working. The Glimmerwings arrived then, drawn by the immense electrical fields. Hundreds of them, a swarm of screeching, leathery things, descended on the mountain. But instead of attacking the cave, they were drawn to the incandescent cable. They threw themselves at the river of energy, vaporizing in brilliant, silent flashes. The four of them watched, huddled together in the dark, as the storm raged for what felt like an eternity. They didn't speak. There were no words for what they were witnessing. They were inside the heart of a cosmic forge, protected by a shield of human ingenuity, Cathar logic, Grok strength, and Lumina spirit. When the storm finally passed, the silence was more profound than any sound. The sky, scrubbed clean, was a brilliant, unfamiliar blue. The twin suns of Xylos cast long, gentle shadows across a landscape that was scoured and steaming, but peaceful. They emerged from the cave into the clean, crisp air. The cables were cooling, ticking softly. The mountain peak was blackened and shattered, but it had held. They were alive. They had faced the worst this world could throw at them, and they had won. Bohr placed a heavy, gentle hand on Alex's shoulder. Kalen's blue optical sensors seemed to glow with a light that Alex now recognized as respect. Ilara's presence filled his mind with a feeling of profound, overwhelming love for this strange, mismatched family. Alex looked out over their world. He saw the forest, the plains, the distant wreck of the ship. He saw the challenges, the dangers, the intricate, deadly dance of the ecosystem. He no longer saw it as a prison. He saw it as a home. He picked up a stone, feeling its weight, its texture, assessing its potential as a tool. A faint smile touched his lips. It was a hard life. It was a terrifying life, but it was his life. In the end, it seemed like he was enjoying survival.